Welcome back to another episode of Baraza Sessions. This is the second episode that we're having as a podcast. My name is Christine Mungai, curator of Baraza Media Lab, and I'm very excited to have Wanjiru Koinange on the podcast today. Wanjiru is the author of the novel The Havoc of Choice and is also the co-founder of Book Bunk. And she'll tell us more about Book Bunk later. Welcome, Shiro.
Thank you, Christine. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes.
This gorgeous space of yours.
Oh, thank you. So thank you. This is Baraza Media Lab, where we do nice things in a cute setting.
Yeah, here for it.
Yeah. So I'm really, really excited to have you on our podcast today to talk about this novel, but also to talk about life around this novel, what it meant to live these events. As Kenyans, we all lived them. If we were alive at that time, we lived them in one way or another. And even for those who were not very aware of what was going on, we carry the legacy of this time with us. The Havoc of Choice is set in the months and weeks around the 2007 general election, which was a very tense, tumultuous, violent, tragic time in Kenya's history. And we'll talk about the book setting and why, it was set at that time, the decision to tell that story in that particular moment. But where I'd like us to begin, Shiro, is for you to tell us, why is this the story that only you could tell? Here at Baraza, we ask people that question a lot. What is it about your life, your story, the things that life has brought your way that made you the person to tell this story?
Wow, you started with a deep one and one that I love, and I think about a lot, to be honest. I don't think that I'm the only one who can tell this story. As you said, it's a Kenyan story. It's something we all lived and experienced. But the reason why I decided to tell this story is because in 2012, I moved away. I moved to Cape Town. I was going to do my master's. I had to get away from Nairobi. I'd suffered loss, and I couldn't be in the city anymore. So I went to Cape Town to pursue my master's in writing. And as soon as I would talk and say that I'm Kenyan, guys would be like, "Oh, shame, are you guys okay?" And I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, we're okay." And this is 5 years on, right?
Right.
And I just keep hearing this question, like, "How are you after 07? You guys must be so sad. How are you dealing?" And I'm just like, we've accepted and moved on. That's what we were told to do, and we did it. And
Kenyan way.
The Kenyan way. We know how to move on. We forget easily, but that's exactly what we did. And then because it kept coming up, and even I think in one of my grad school seminars, we had a whole session dedicated to the stories that come out of conflict. I realized that it's not the people who are asking me that had a problem, and there's something wrong with the way that we were grieving, or not wrong, but incomplete, I guess is the right word.
Incomplete. I like that.
Yeah. And so the thing that I do when I don't understand something is I throw myself into research. And let me tell you, for maybe 9 months, I read every single thing I could about the post-election violence. And this is 5 years on, when people were still processing. I think Dr. Joyce Nyariro said soon after, and I may be misquoting her, but she said something about it would take about a decade for us to fully recognize what has happened during 07 and begin to write about it. And this book is coming out 12 years on. 13 years on. So I think she was completely right. And I think that the reason why I wrote this story is because when I finished reading about the loss and the lack of, I guess, national grieving around this, the biggest violence we'd experienced since independence, and we just moved on, I was like, something's wrong. And I wanted to write about it as my own way of trying to understand what may have happened. And also just to tell guys, are we truly okay? Because I know every time we have an election, I go into fetal position. I'm terrified and I want to grab my passport and run. And I won't run because this is my country and this is where my stuff is. And this is where I want to live. And because I know I'm not the only one who goes into PTSD when we have another election, even if I wasn't directly affected in the way that some of the people in the book were, I know that we haven't addressed the loss and the violence, basically. We just haven't addressed it. And I hope that people would begin to think about it differently. Obviously, time, and I'm not saying that we need to break down every time we have an election or kind of just go all out in the grieving of it. But I think that there's an acknowledgement of loss that we just haven't done. And that was what was shocking to me. And obviously, there's a proximity to politics that I've always had, being a Koinange in this country. My father was never a politician, but there was always someone in our family running for office. My grandfather was a politician. And even if I didn't ideally have that closeness to it. It was always in the periphery. It was always, every time you mention your name, you get a question about your connection to politics. And my mother was very deliberate in raising us as regular middle-class Nairobi children, because she didn't want us growing up spoiled or growing up thinking that we were entitled to things because of the legacy my grandfather left us. And that obviously gave me a unique kind of point of view, because I know what it's like to be in a political space
family
that you don't want to be in, because I don't like the limelight, and my father didn't either. But that's access that I thought was unique to me, and I thought I would use that for the story.
And that explains the point of view of the main characters in this book.
Completely.
Yes.
Completely.
I was going to ask that, but I've seen it now. I've seen it made sense right now.
Okay.
I'd like us to go back to what you said about the months that you spent reading and researching around the election. When we put this into context with our national language, in the words of Yvonne Awar, one of them being silence. It's becoming increasingly difficult as time goes on to find information, news stories, that kind of stuff about particular events in Kenya's history. And I'm starting to consider the possibility that the archives are being shaped in a certain way, or manipulated or scrubbed even. And I'd like you to tell us about what your experience was in researching these stories. Okay. Because there are some stories, some photos, some images which made an impression on me, but now I can't find them. So I'd just like you to tell us a little bit more about that. What was your experience, and how do you see the archive existing, and not even as a static thing in the Kenyan context, but as something that is very much up for grabs, depending on who's in power and what interest the archive serves?
Oh my goodness, this is such a point of pain for me, because I agree with you. I have no proof that these archives are being erased, but I did. I want to say 95% of the research for this book when I was living outside of Kenya. But at that point, 9 months worth of reading was a lot of material. And my biggest regret today is that I saved all of these links on the server for my grad school then, and then graduated without having kind of downloaded it. And I'm still trying to get access to it, because I thought about that doing edits, because I had to go back and check my facts and be like, is this number correct and everything? And there are things that I remembered reading, and I remembered writing down in my notebook that I couldn't find anymore. So I know nothing surprises me about the way that we do things in this country, and just especially around memory and what memory can trigger. And the fact that all of these histories are up for grabs. Anybody can shape what we remember. That's why we're told to forget so viciously, accept and move on, because that way, if you move on and you don't really give thought to what's happening, then it can happen again. And it happens again because when you don't remember, you don't ask questions. And when you don't ask questions, you don't fight for judgment and for justice as well. So I really think that I didn't struggle at that point to get information, because I didn't even really know what I was looking for. I was really just trying to see what the landscape of the violence looked like. There's a lot of foreign reporting that I relied on.
Yes.
A lot of the reports that I drew numbers from were local reports from the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. Whatever human rights organizations were reporting in the area, I relied heavily on that, because I wanted data that was not obviously skewed. There's less and less of it around, which I think this book is a really good, important thing to just kind of. It's 2 weeks of a 100-day period, or over 100-day period. But I think that the more we kind of think about how we can harvest personal memories from 07, then we begin to kind of shape what they look like in future, or draw a map around this thing was not spontaneous. Nothing about it was spontaneous. But there are all of these things that I think are tied to justice. So that's the reason why we're told to forget, or asked to forget, or told that remembering, where do you want to remember? Is it going to bring things back? Why do you want to do the painful work? And it's painful work. You've read the book, you know it's painful. But how do we move on if we don't really understand why things happened the way that we did?
That's so interesting that you use the language of forgetting as violence.
Yeah.
That it's actually something that is made to happen, forced to happen.
Exactly.
And sometimes we think that holding on to the memory is holding on to the pain. But we don't actually see that forgetting is also pain.
Exactly.
Forgetting is violence.
And pain is important.
Right.
Pain is super important. That's the only way we know something's not right, when you feel pain. And I think that there's this thing that I find unique about Kenyans, And I think we don't ask questions because we're scared of the answers. And I think it's shifting slowly, and it's shifting in ways that make me encouraged about what we're going to, because storytelling is how we can address these things, right? This book could have been a work of nonfiction, but it wouldn't have the impact if it was a work of nonfiction, because when you tag on emotions and you tag on imagination, then you can actually get a kind of response that lasts and that spurs people to action.